Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today I'm finally going to be covering the sophomore album from Dominique Fils-Aimé. Stay tuned. So I was preparing for this to be a rather difficult review, and at first glimpse that might not seem to make a lot of sense. Sure, another little known artist that I found off Bandcamp, but the ones I've often chosen to cover, they've got a color and personality that leap off the page immediately and deserve more attention, but Dominique Fils-Aimé was a little bit different. For one, instead of a swath of indie rock, we're dealing with tones that owe a fair bit more to R&B and jazz, and explicitly rely on a brand of minimalism in the arrangements that's very tasteful and mature, but can also occasionally come across as a little bit too understated and classy for its own good. The sort of mature music that folks tend to wind up appreciating more than outright loving. Now, that's not saying I didn't like her debut album, Nameless, from early 2018, which was very spare but potent as hell thanks to her striking vocals and subtle textured grooves. It was a really short but rewarding listen, but I was hoping her follow-up here would amp things up just a little bit, add a little bit more texture and tension and richness to match the vocal arrangements that were such a terrific highlight. So, alright, what do we find on Stay Tuned? Well, honestly, this is the sort of low-key but generally very rewarding listen that I've gone back to fairly regularly over the past couple of weeks. And while I don't want to directly compare this project to that of Solange and When I Get Home, while there are some similarities in terms of theme and flow, there is a greater backbone and sense of cohesive structure to Stay Tuned that I really appreciated. Now, I would struggle to call this quite excellent, at least not yet. Like with When I Get Home, I think there is an element of emotional resonance to which its target audience will pick up much more strongly than I will, but the fact that I've been so willing to come back to this proves there is something there that's gripping me, and it definitely deserves a lot more attention, probably earlier than the timing of this review, if we're being brutally honest, but I'm happy we got to it, because this is a pretty great album. Now, in terms of production and composition, Stay Tuned is a sort of album that is all about the subtle growth. Nothing too dramatic or sudden. The spare bass grooves and the textured percussion, they're tighter, a little bit more kinetic and tense. And there are a few more moments that show a little more instrumental diversity, but the reason you're primarily going to come to this project is Dominique Fils-Aimé herself. And I won't mince words. If you've got a project this minimalist and you're not primarily reliant on atmospheric textures or crescendos, the vocal arrangements, they are paramount, and they're easily the biggest selling point of this album. Never too loud or oversold or garish, instead hitting the balance between reserved and raw that was exactly where I wanted to see her progress, with a ton of real poise and some serious pipes. Now, that being said, this is a very gradual evolution, and if you're stuck thinking that this sort of album is almost too reserved and low-key like her debut album, well, I kind of get why. We'll get to the lyrical content in a moment, but for as much tension can be built here, there's not a moment of clear release or climax, and it's hard to avoid the feeling that even down to the project's title, that by the end we're still going to be wanting more. Now, on some level, that does make a certain amount of sense. This brand of jazz-inspired R&B is all about tension and contrasting elements and the slow growth of organic passion, but I do think this album should have at least had 1 or 2 points to truly explode here, especially given that she's got the pipes to pull it off. Well, okay, maybe I guess Gun Burial and Somebody get close, and they're both absolutely highlights, but you do get my point. Instead, a lot of this album pivots to a few moments of smoother R&B and gospel, which certainly sound really great, but given the minimal accompaniment, I would not be surprised if you've heard something similar, or you're not quite as wowed. That being said, if you're not gripped by the vocals like I am, there are some phenomenal production flourishes on this album if you're paying attention to the details. The creeping low end across a subtle bass and percussion on Where There Is Smoke, the smoky organic simmer on There Is Probably Fire that plays off the horns and the piano remarkably well. Similar formula just kills on Somebody. The woodwinds ratcheting off the low end on Sunrise, and that's before we get the post-dubstep warping atmosphere on Freedom that pretty much comes out of nowhere, but actually is just understated enough to really work for me. But what I also kind of admire about this project is how on a compositional level, we can still get songs like Revolution Serenade and Joy River that take some very obvious cues from vintage soul and gospel, but are just stripped back and poised enough for feel Fils-Aimé to make them her own, and with the mix given just enough space, it sounds really impressive. But a big part of this comes through in the content as well, most of which has been described as exploring the socio-political undercurrent and upheaval that came through the 1960s in black culture. But what gets interesting is how the interpretation here is intentionally more abstract. Now, you absolutely get some references to that time period. 9LRR is probably the most obvious, but Fils-Aimé is much more interested in the emotional undercurrent of that time period and a lot of its parallels today, specifically in finding the mantras and core in order to stir the soul to the cause, both hers and others. Well aware that the most complex problem in today's day and age is often just getting people to turn out. And while for my personal preference might be for a little more lyrical detail, I did like the subtext that infuses a lot of these songs. How the first quarter of the album is a slow release of emotions that demand that outlet. You see that tension, you know it's going to explode, but it also allows Gun Burial to be the kiss-off for those who would constrain black femininity. But also there's tenderness as well, because for as much as Big Man Do Cry is the continuation of that arc, it also highlights the systemic issues in the second verse that inhibit real male vulnerability and emotional growth. Now, I will say that for as much as I like Somebody, it might have worked a little bit better earlier in the track list to plant the seeds of the rest of the album, even if I do find it interesting how much she gives personhood to the revolution and cause ahead as that other. And on Revolution Serenade highlights there is some danger in going for that pursuit and that love. I appreciate the nuance there. And while as a reference point it might feel a little obvious, I did like that Free Dom highlighted those internal struggles to take agency for what might come ahead. And now again, I'm not really crazy about how the album ends. It feels a little abortive, and the co-option of some of that language on the title track might deserve a little more of a developed song, but that's a minor quibble overall. And while I got a few other small points of contention, Magic Whistle feels kinda underweight, a little unnecessary in the track list, and again, I'd love to see what Fils-Aimé would do with a little bit more edge and focus on defined hooks. I came around to really liking this album, even if, again, I am far from the primary audience and it's not really for me, which again, absolutely okay. But at the same time, it's a brisk slice of some spare jazz, R&B, soul, and gospel that's extremely easy to respect and appreciate, and one that's just consistently grown on me. Just the vocal arrangements have pulled me back time and time again. And as such, yeah, I don't know. An extremely light 8 out of 10, absolutely recommended. Very sensual, very smart, and very promising going forward. I think Dominique Fils-Aimé deserves a lot of attention. So yeah, check this out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. Like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Bit of a shorter review this time, but hey, when it's this stripped back and bare, it works for getting the point across, and it's really damn good. I'm happy I finally got a chance to talk about it. But hey, if you want to buy or stream the album, link down there below. And I got the poll up there. I'm curious for those people who hear it, what they think about it, because again, I think this is pretty great. A little bit low-key, and I think that might throw some people off who are looking for R&B that's a little bit more in your face. And again, it's more mature, classy kind of music, but again, definitely worth your time. But anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. Again, still fiddling with the lights. We'll see how things go. But till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.